now part of what's difficult for people to understand is that when it comes down to votes at synod, there's a lot of math that gets involved, where you have a whole bunch of classes. They're all over the place. All those classes have 4 delegates, and so those things get translated into votes. But when it and in some ways it will represent sort of the mind of the church when you think about the organic church. But it's likely the case that in many churches in the Christian Reformed Church, you have probably, because a majority of the people in a Christian Reformed church are traditional on this subject, there are probably some, it could be a small number, could be a large number, but they're a minority in the church for whom they're much more open. Some of them perhaps even affirming. They'd really like to see the church go in this way. Again, because of the instrument using the covenant of office bearers to try to do this, some churches, I think similar to classes, a lot of ministers, they do not want to push this issue in their church because they're like, this is only going to cause me trouble. There's no upside to this conversation in my local church. So, but at the same time, this is in some ways going to have a dynamic on local level. So some churches are going to be in crisis over this. Many churches, especially if they sort of read the room and say, I'm of 5 or 10 people in this church of 100 or 200, lean affirming, but I already know I go to a conservative church, so I've long ago made my peace with the fact that I see differently. But then, okay, do I sign the form of subscription? Before, I sort of had this pass with a gravamen. I think many such people sort of take a silent gravamen and say, I'm not gonna make a stink in my own local church. My feelings are so. What happens at the local level with respect to this in churches where, well, they're predominantly conservative, but you've got a few people in there? What do you think happens, Ren?
I think that issue occurs with many things. Go back to women in office. I think people submit and people say, yeah, I understand for membership. I'm a member here, and yeah, they silent gravamen. They swallow whatever issue it is they have, and they submit to the will of the church. I think that I don't know. I mean, my locally for us, yeah, we're going to hold strong to that. Leadership should be of the same mind, on the confessional standards, not the same mind on everything, lock, stock, and barrel, but on the confessions. I think that's a starting point for where we have things in common.
Okay, what do you think happens, Rick?
Well, here locally, not much is going to change. I guess, backing up a little bit, the feeling I had at Synod was that we were talking really about kind of, we're all related issues or peripheral issues. The real question is, what is our position? And can these two positions, are we going to agree to disagree? Will that work even? And basically, we address that question by looking at these other, gravamen, at discipline, covenant of office bearers. And the answer to all of that is, well, we're going to have one position, and we're going to be united in our one position. At least that's what we're going to expect of office bearers. And in some ways, I thought it would be better to just talk about those two questions. There was actually an appendix in the actually in last year's agenda and this year's agenda, just basically highlighting those two questions. That's what we're talking about. What's our position? What kind of community are we going to be? Can these two things be held together simultaneously? One side says that same-sex practice is a sin that needs to be repented of, that might endanger your very soul. The other side says, well, no, it's creational variant that should be blessed by God, or as someone else says, a holy, precious gift. So you have sin and a holy, precious gift. It's pretty hard, in my opinion, to hold those things, two things together. And so what you saw on the floor of Synod, you know, if you're lean affirming and you come to Synod, you're going to hear lots of mini sermonettes, basically, calling for you to repent. I mean, you're just going to hear that. And by the same token, the other side is going to say, well, why you don't have compassion? You're too judgmental, and it's just going to go on and on and on. And so, you know, again, I do think what we decided does elevate the conversation. Do you really want to continue like this? So again, it's the classics that have more affirming churches where this is really going to come into play. And I think it begins with just having that basic conversation. Can we really agree to disagree about this? You know, I think you're hard pressed to make that case, given what has happened in so many other churches, even in the RCA. It's just very, very difficult.
Okay. Well, now I would imagine in Canada, and my view of what's going on in the Canadian churches is that they're culturally, they're probably same-sex marriage has been legal longer in Canada. I think Canada it's sort of, it's in the Americas, but there's a lot of Europe in it. How do you think this is going to play at the local level, David?
It's going to be tough. I think there's a lot of divided churches right now, and I think they have been having a lot of trouble for quite a few years now. My previous church, I don't exactly know what's going on there. It's been a couple of years, but it's a divided church. How are they going to call a new pastor? It's like, how are they going to agree to? Because you sort of need to make a choice about which way to go. I don't know how they're going to do that. Same with the 25% of churches in Classes Toronto. How are they going to call a new pastor when there's a lot of division on the ground? I think, I think this is really going to test the Canadian CRC. There's, you got the Towards Canada CRC. I can't remember the title, but that's going to have a bit of traction, I think, over the next year. I think they're going to have less traction than they think they're going to have. I don't think it's actually going to go well, but I don't know. You never know.
All right.
And a lot will just, my church is kind of quietly content with how things are going. And I'm very thankful for that. Like, it could be a lot different right now. So my feeling on my take on this issue is similar to my church's at the moment, which is just, I'm just so thankful for. But yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of Canadian churches really be impacted by this because it's definitely more progressive and more tolerant. Not always the best sense of that word, tolerant, right? Let's just keep the family together and not talk about this. I think you'll see a lot of churches that end up doing that, but that only works until you have someone come in that is same-sex attracted and wants to get married. It's just, at a certain point you have to face it and together make a choice. And I think that's going to be a very hard choice in Canada. A lot of churches are struggling already. So it's one thing to split when you've got 300 people. It's another thing to split when you've got 110. So there's a lot to consider. I will say, when I was at Synod, I had kind of culture shock. It's been a long time since I've been in the States. And so there were times when I'm like, are these my people? Like, I'm a traditional person generally, but I felt like it was a different experience. So yeah, along the way, I also felt like, I wonder if maybe we do need a CRC in Canada. But I think that if we did have a CRC in Canada, it would quickly divide over this issue. It wouldn't last long. I have to go. So I'd love to just keep talking, but my wife and I are actually going to a Blue Jays game, and we got to hit the road. So
Where are your priorities,
I know.
David? A Blue Jays game?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, David. Thank you for giving us your time. And
Sure, happy to talk more anytime.
All right.
Good
Rod,
to be with you guys as well.
Just here.
Take care, David.
Any comments at the local level? You've got these, I think you said it nicely. In Tucson, you used to have 45 CRC members, church members, and now you've got, over 300. Is it been just, is this something that's going to be an issue, or has for your churches this issue, the churches have already sort of figured out where they stand on this. They've figured out how they approach it. And I mean, what do you think?
So we have great division in the village, right? Like in our church, I have affirmers and I have people who think that, we should burn them at the stake. And we have, Biden supporters and Trump supporters, and we all sit down next to each other and we all love each other, and we have to fight to do that, right? Like it's like you have to take it out of the context of the competitiveness and the we have to win mentality and just minister to each other. And so, yeah, there are people who didn't want to join the CRC because of particular stances we took, women in office or what, for instance. And then there are people who like, oh, that would be the greatest thing ever. We should be a part of that tomorrow. And so it's frustrating because it's not that we're not dealing with the issue, right? The accusation is always, you're not dealing with the issue. Well, yeah, we are. I can tell you some amazing conversations we've had over the years with lovely people who think very differently than I do or than the leadership. The leadership is of one mind, right? And I think, but that goes back to the submission question, not necessarily because we totally agree with each other, but because we choose to be together and stay together. And man, Ren, your thing about compromising stuff, that's the battle all the time, right? Like, what am I compromising? And so I really have to fight against that, and remember that. And I do, and I have taken stands where I go this far and no further, right? I just can't see us do that. So it won't affect that the church, but it's because of the mindset. I do want to add that that's the problem. We say, well, churches are affirming. Baloney. There are no such thing as institutions that affirm. I always used to say there's no such thing as a Christian bookstores. Bookstores don't get on their knees and give their lives to Jesus. Give me a break. There are bookstores that are owned and operated by Christians, and they will look different than those who aren't. So and the Phoenix Church was a great example. It just split in half because half of the people thought women in office was fine and the other half didn't. And so you just tore it in two. And that's sad. Like it's sad because this is where you took a stand and no further, right? And so yeah, it always boils down to individuals, to people. And I think we forget that sometimes. Well, the affirming churches in Grand Rapids East, or the affirming churches there, or the not-affirming churches here, or the Midwest where everybody got together and plotted this thing. Well, please, I can go. If your church is doing your job, you better have some people in it that vehemently disagree with even the standards of the church.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to do one question and then, go ahead, Ren.
How is this decision in moving forward and this split going to affect you three pastors? I mean, Rod, with your number of trips, like you said, 89 when you're spending 2 weeks with people building relationships, and because I didn't do seminary, I can see from an outside perspective how Synod is old home week for a lot of people, and it really could be a vacation without the wife. And there's a reason why they have Canadian Bible study and what that means. And I mean, but this is causing this division. And you're going to have, you will probably lose friends over this. There will relationships that are going to get burned. And how deeply is that cutting you three?
The man who invited me to preach the very first time and walked me into becoming a pastor and sent me to Tucson is an affirming pastor. And so now I have to consider him as a unbeliever and a tax collector.
And we welcome him at dinner.
Which is how Jesus dealt with it. And I love that man to death, and I still love him, and I can't stop.
Nope.
I just can't stop loving these people that I know. And I can't say, okay, you're in or you're out. I know we officially said that. And, you know, I struggle with that part of it, just because, yeah. It's, you say I'll lose friends. I refuse to. I just won't do it. As much as it lies in me, we will remain in intimate, deep relationship and fellowship because, I think that's what Jesus invites us to. How did he treat tax collectors? Well, it's pretty clear, and by the way, he got a reputation for being a drunkard and a glutton. And so I better have that reputation if in fact what we've decided is, and that's what making it confessional did to us, right? Now we have to say you're out. You're out in the void, and that's hard.
Well, I disagree that's what saying it's confessional meant, because my understandings of confessional are not, let's say, salvific, and I really use that term in a measured way. I think part of the reason I wanted to see the Christian, and I knew the Christian Reformed Church was going to have a confessional conversation over this, was in the Protestant Reformation, you had this splintering of the church. And then, you've got the Roman Catholic Church burning people on the stake. A little bit later, you've got, Lutherans and Calvinists lining up to burn Baptists and non-Trinitarians and all of this. Now, fortunately, the losers, we didn't line up the losers of Synod and shoot them next to the FAC. We don't do that. I see confessionality as being, as at least helping us sort of say, this is what we think. And it was very clear that the local option was not going to work. The RCA tried the classical option. And I think we're going to try a synodical option. And what I want to see happen is I'd like to see the exiles now, the confessional exiles, not I'd like to see them stay together, and I'd like to see them stay together right next to us. And I would much rather I'd like to see sort of two parallel CRCs where we're actually continuing to sort of work through this issue. You might have churches hopping one way or another. You might have clergy hopping one way or another. But I know, Clay Leibold says I'm full of it, but that's fine. But, and I look at, so before Rod and I were on the Home Missions Board, we met each other over CRC Voices. And CRC Voices, I mean, this is perhaps almost as bad as Gore v. Bush that year, because we, presidential campaigns were often, because, you had Christians that George W. Bush was just, the devil incarnate, and Al Gore was the devil incarnate. And I mean, we watched CRC Voices just, blow up over that. And now CRC Voices blows up over this. But, you have friends, you have elders and, churches. And I mean, it's going to be complicated. And unlike what happened with the Protestant Reformed Church and the URC, I am hoping that the CRC enlightened progressives can show up the conservatives in terms of, okay, we're going to split, but we're going to split in a different way than they did. We're not just going to throw rocks at the church and go away and say, you're Christian Reformed and I'm Protestant Reformed, so, you are condemned. Okay, you're progressives. Let's work this a different way. Now, if I were serving a progressive classis or a progressive church, You know, when Aaron Vriesman asked, you know, what happens to you after this? I say, I stay with my church and I stay with my classes because these are my people. That's what I'm going to do. But if my classes and my church went a different way, I'd probably stay with them too. And then if I were a progressive, I'd say, okay, let's figure out how to not, you know, be Solomon and cut Calvin University in half. Or, I mean, can we please be a little creative? And all you progressives are supposed to be the people who are flexible and open. And especially in Grand Rapids, you've got all these people with immense institutional memory and knowledge. If anybody can figure out how to make the pension, you know, not be a dividing line, we should be able to do this. Okay. So, okay. I would like to see confessionality as this, I believe. Oh, you believe differently. Can we use confessionality to actually discuss our beliefs? Because the kind of issue that we are wrestling with, like women in office or same-sex marriage, these are the kinds of issues that get resolved over centuries in the church, not years. And so if we can actually think a little bit longer, maybe we can do something interesting and productive. And that's my plea. And that's been my plea for a confession. I remember I said confessional conversations. The progressives didn't like it because I said the word confessional. They've sort of been, you know, looking the other way about those issues. Conversation sounded like a progressive word. I said, look, we need to talk about these issues far more than the application. We need to understand how these issues actually drill down much deeper theologically. And to do that, we're going to need probably decades. So can we have structures that afford this, even if, I think, as Rick said, well, it's really hard to have two very different perspectives on a pretty foundational issue. You know, I'm a conservative church, but I don't really mind my polygamous pastor. I don't really mind my polyamorous pastor. Because he's sleeping with my aunt and my niece. Love is love. I think it ain't gonna work. But let's talk about these things, and let's not just shoot each other.
I think you said you know you can disagree with me. You're always doing that anyway, and you're wrong. But I do walk in very conservative circles. And you do hear that this is salvific. It is, you know, their souls are in danger. You can read it in the conservative sides on CRC Voices. You can read it, you know. I have these conversations all the time with people. You are in danger of hellfire. That's where you're at. And so I don't want to gloss over that because I think, yes, I agree with you. Let's find ways to work together. Man, nobody's more excited about that than I am. But I think there are huge ramifications, at least in the very. And I don't know how conservative the conservative denomination is now. Like, and it is that whole thing. Oh, well, now we won't have to fight anymore. Well, Paul, you know, we fought over women in office. We fought over the red and blue Psalter hymnal. I mean, we have found ways to fight about every stinking thing we'll ever, because Satan loves that crap. You know, like I'll just give him something else to argue about for 10 years. And meanwhile, nobody will come to Jesus. It's just stupid. And so, but yeah, denominations don't matter anymore anyway, in some ways. Like I have people all over the map in my church.
Faith is personal.
And it's just personal relationship. Yep.
Faith is personal. How do we move past?
Well, first of all, thank you, Rod, for that memory. Also, you telling me about the vaccine conflict and how horrible that was in your church, and yet somehow it was survived. And that also reminds me then of my own miserable divorce, and how painful that was, and how much suffering happened around it, and how somehow it is possible through the grace of God that people find each other. And I have quite a workable relationship with my ex-wife right now, and we can do family celebrations together, and we can be in the same room for all kinds of wonderful things. And then furthermore, and I've mentioned this on Voices before, 80 years ago, Schilder hit the road in Holland on the issue of whether or not local congregations were bound by synodical directives, and or whether they were vrijgemaakt, which is free from synodical control. And not too long ago, there was a ceremony in Holland where these two denominations were reconciled and found each other. And maybe we are talking about an 80-year span.
I'm going to be dead, just so you know.
Well, but if we're not here for the long view, then what are we doing here?
Right.
Thanks, Rod. Thanks, Rod. No, and that is my hope. And I know maybe it's a pipe dream. I don't, you look at Len Vandezee, Bill Harris. I mean, many of the guys on Voices that I just dearly love and respect. And I don't want to, and many churches that have, COS, Church of the Servant in Grand Rapids. I mean, how many Calvin profs go there? Good night. And I don't know how Calvin works through this. And this happens just as Calvin is having all of the, they just lost their president that they had just brought in. And I mean, this is a mess. The CRC pension isn't, for those of us who have it.
Yeah. What is that?
Yeah.
Beer money.
By the way, was good night an intentional pun or just a Calvin? Sorry.
So and for me, I mean, again, because I've always sort of been on the CRC left. For me, I think if any group of people should be able to split left well for the long term, that doesn't sacrifice institutions, it should be the minders of institutions in West Michigan that have minded those institutions for a very long time. And when I hear them talking like, I understand that in the moment there's sort of a big, you err, you're surprised, you're unhappy. But at some point I'd say, okay, now think about this and think about what you want. If you really believe that this is you certainly believe this is your theological conviction, okay, figure out how to make it work and prove the main line wrong and do it right. And if 50 years from now, conservative churches, because they couldn't handle this issue well, are sort of dying, and these affirming churches are thriving, well, then that's the proof we all need. Words are cheap, and words of talk has gotten cheaper with the technology. So that's my take anyway.